You know, if there's one question I could ask more than any other, more even than what would we taste like to chicken, that question would have to be, Mark, how can you hope to capture the perplexing geopolitical configuration, captivating cultural complexity, and frenetic economic dynamism of China through photography? Well, 今天我们来回答这个问题。
From Oracle bones to Huawei phones, China is known for its long history, stretching back over 1600 years BC, as well as its rapid development over the last few decades. A bit late to the global economic party, China showed up in the 1970s carrying a half-drunk bottle of baijiu, and since then has managed to small talk its way over to the buffet table to become the second largest economy in the world, completely reinventing itself now from being a largely agrarian country to a highly urbanized society. And now that we've done the Discovery Channel précis, what does it mean to a visitor like me, arriving in the country with both my camera and curiosity to record all of this through photography? Well, I hope you're not here for facts, although I might sprinkle a couple throughout this video just to add legitimacy to my unwarranted opinions. This is a personal journey through 6 cities in China over a 2-week period as I met with universities, gave guest lectures, ate and photographed my way across the landscape, inflicting both my Western clumsiness and terrible Mandarin on the unsuspecting populace. And now I get to share these unsolicited impressions with you through a random grab bag of clips and photos. Strap yourself in, because this is a chaotic one. I'll try and give it some semblance of coherence. I'm going to frame this around some defined characteristics: technology and transport, urbanization, food, politics, love and sex. We'll browse the buffet of life and then, who knows, maybe even try to make some sense of it at the end. Shall we begin? This is perhaps the first thing a visitor will notice. With China's developing economy comes urbanization, as people move to the cities for work, creating a similar need for housing, and this is something that China has embraced, with the rapid construction of apartments throughout its major cities. Everywhere you see anonymous apartment blocks ostensibly built to house the population, but also fueled by a speculative real estate investment bubble. And this construction boom is one of the things that has fueled China's economy over the last few decades even. Now the real estate bubble is leaving the country teetering on the precipice of financial crisis, with ridiculously high vacancy rates and whole ghost cities which have been built on the expectation of a continuing influx that just hasn't happened. The result, China is full of sterile, anonymous architecture with not even enough character to be called brutalist, but still brutal enough to form a soul-sapping uniform concrete expanse that stretches for miles. This is most evident in mid-tier cities like Zhengzhou, one of the older capitals, and where I started my visit, as well as cities like Shenzhen, which has grown from being a fishing village in the 1970s to become an ultra-modern city. This has created an uncomfortable mix. In my previous visits, it wasn't unusual to see old guys cycling in their pajamas among young kids in designer gear, checking their phones. Today, finding the last vestiges of the older parts of the cities is becoming more difficult. Shenzhen doesn't even really have an older part as such, though it's interesting to note that just as a growing child works its way through new school shoes every year, it is constantly reinventing itself. Older parts of the port are now being rebranded as arts and culture precincts, a bit like the Qizhou Bar 798 art zone in Beijing. This area is set up as a place of cafes and galleries for the locals to explore. not seemingly with a huge amount of success if my weeknight visit was any indication. Being pleasantly free of human pollution did allow me to train my lens on the recent industrial history and constant evolution of the city, with its chimneys, silos and warehouses providing the backdrop for desolate galleries, bars and gaming cafes. For a city of 12.5 million people, it sure seemed empty. Not so Shanghai though. Always China's most international city, Shanghai is a hub of human activity. And while there are some beautiful examples of colonial architecture on the Bund, it's probably best known for its skyscrapers on the opposite Pudong side of the river, including the Eastern Pearl, Jinmao Tower, World Financial Center, and since 2015, the 623-meter Shanghai Tower. Guangzhou, just a short train trip from Shenzhen, and the capital of Guangdong province has a similarly impressive architectural penis substitute in the form of the Canton Tower. And certainly there are some beautifully maintained historical places of interest such as the Yongqing Fang, where you can at least get a sense of old Chinese culture. But is that real China, or now just a curated narrative of Guangzhou's history where I'm simply another member of the audience of local tourists? Manicured gardens and stone bridges don't make a city, and big grid city planning doesn't avail itself to street life. Where is the teeming horde of the great unwashed to counter the clinical cyberpunk arcologies? Think the grit and grime of Blade Runner, the chaos of the Kowloon Walls City, a geopolitical limbo land that grew into the densest precinct of the world before being demolished when Hong Kong was handed back to China. It's only when you really search that you can find the true beating heart of Chinese cities. Older suburbs such as here in Guangzhou, where you can meander through the narrow alleyways of mixed residential and commercial, seeing butchers, sign makers, cobblers, laundromats, repair shops, tiny restaurants and street vendors. And sure, most people are now ordering their Waimai through WeChat, but when you walk through this part of town, you do get a sense of a living, breathing city made up of people, not just architecture. I don't know how long this area will remain. One world blots out the other, and of course, just as the city has evolved, so have the needs of the people becoming physically and virtually connected. Yes, you'll still see bicycles on the roads, people just sitting on street corners, smoking or carrying their shopping home, but gone are the cliches of rickshaws and the village donkey. These megacities need to be connected, and China has a huge air and rail infrastructure to service this. In Australia, we still don't have high-speed trains, but in China, they've had multiple generations of ultra-high-speed rail. I was able to cross the country at 400 kilometers an hour in quiet luxury, watching the world zoom by me in a literal blur. And now they're testing 1,000 kilometre an hour maglev trains, so my blurry photos can be even more blurry. It's not just intercity travel either. Despite being a short bus ride from Hong Kong, Shenzhen is also a major air transport hub, with glitzy new terminals added to the already not so old Shenzhen Baoan International Airport to handle the growing megalopolis. I did make a new friend while I was in Shenzhen. I caught this little fella wandering the departure hall. Surprisingly, not a great conversationalist. Perhaps I need to polish up my Putonghua. His cousin at the hotel was equally aloof despite my friendly approach. I don't know what it is with these robots circling the lobbies and halls of buildings. Perhaps they're doing circuit training. And yes, I did go there. Okay, let's change the subject. So don't be fooled into thinking of China as a quaint country where toothless peasants eke out a meagre existence in an inhospitable and callous society. Seriously, if you want to see that level of debasement, you need to visit the UK. China's middle class has now hit its second generation of single-child families breeding spoiled and entitled little emperors with a gluttonous appetite for phones, cars and consumer electronics. This girl has just found out that a mum is making her skip an iPhone generation. Speaking of phones, let's be honest here. China has had a long-held reputation as a copycat culture. But what happens when the copies get better than the originals? It happened in Japan. This imitation Leica was made by Canon. I'm not sure if you've heard of that little company. When I was a child, you drove a European car or you drove Jap crap. And now we're all aspiring after Toyota Land Cruisers for their reliability. Same for South Korea. My friends laughed at me when my first TV that I bought with my own money was a lucky Gold Star. Now I still own an LG 55-inch HDR 4K Behemoth. Well, 55 inches seems a little small these days. Everywhere in China, you're surrounded by huge screens shouting at you, urging you to buy the latest tech. Huawei built its reputation by copying other devices. They even copied European architecture for their head office. But now they've developed their own technologies. I mean, we always knew Huawei had some top-notch 5G spyware, but now they're confident enough to ditch Google and produce their own operating system. Huawei isn't just a phone company anymore, it's a vertically integrated consumer experience with the shopping mall showrooms to match. China really is no different from other countries, having succumbed to the cancerous tumour of consumerism. A walk down East Nanjing Road in Shanghai is a celebration of that great 21st century pastime, shopping. Consumerism, globalization, what does this mean for the socialist ideal that underpins the national identity? How do they resolve this conflict between the rampant individualism of capitalism and Confucian values? Well, they don't really. China has always been a trading nation, and despite bouts of isolation and expansionism, invading and being invaded, and as a visitor, one of the biggest shocks is that eerie but quite rational blend of socialist ideology and capitalist pragmatism. Yes, you knew we were going to go there eventually. Of course, the Western perspective of China is one of a totalitarian state controlled through coercion and propaganda. The biggest irony, of course, is that manufacturing consent through propaganda is an essential element of democracy.
It's a new art in democracy to manufacture consent so that the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, his phrase, the population, will be passive and acquiescent and will accept the rule of the responsible men, people like us. And in fact, the myth is that the media are independent, adversarial, courageous, struggling against power, and
So who are we to criticize? Nevertheless, you can't talk about the weirdness and wonder of China without acknowledging that there are a few fundamental value differences that can be quite visible and quite jarring. Take this spectacle, for example.
迎着飒爽的秋风，迈着坚定的步伐。
I'm not sure if we're training the next generation to be soldiers or social media influencers, but every Chinese university student spends 2 weeks in military training, 7 hours per day of which I'm reliably informed, 3 of which are spent learning to walk up and down in preparation for the graduation ceremony. Of course, there are certain things never mentioned in WeChat or in general conversation except perhaps in whispered tones and behind closed doors. Suffice it to say, though, that great presidential corollary, Winnie the Pooh, is not actually banned in China. Our chubby little cubby all stuffed with fluff is freely found on Baidu. Just don't enter the word she in there or you'll find there are magically no references whatsoever. So you don't need to worry. You can still buy your willy-nilly silly old president from a vending machine to cuddle up with during the cold nights while you wait for your offer letter from the local Xinjiang Vocational Education and Training Center. China isn't just a place for local heroes either. The no-limits friendship between Russia and China is evident. A bromance between Xi and Putin that seems to have inched out Vlad's other orange paramour, at least for now. You can pick up a biography of Putin from your local Chinese coffee shop and browse the pages of this great man's achievements. Marksman, fighter pilot, judo expert, this intimidating symbol of masculine virility is enough to make my gonads shrink into my kidneys, but it's still probably more fun to flick through in the doctor's surgery than a copy of Woman's Day while you wait for your prostate exam. You can also play cards with Putin, fingering his imperious form as you lay down your ace. I can't bring myself to actually open this packet, and who knows what's actually inside the sealed section. Sure, he's a ruthless former KGB leader with a penchant for war crimes, but he's a great friend to China, and look at this man. Now, there is the face of a guy who knows how to tell a really good knock-knock joke. Look, we're all products of the society in which we stew. Our worldview is filtered through the media we consume. One of the fun things to do when travelling is to turn on the local TV to see that theirs is just as bad as ours. Lots of state-sanctioned good news stories about the wonderful progress of the country, of course, as well as the usual melange of soaps, traditional stories, and other forms of what could loosely be described as entertainment.
但是他怕摔，一步一步，慢慢的走。是配方不一样。把航母战斗群派到地中海。好。哎，小倩，快看，队员退员了。退员了吗？是啊。专业的方法。徐奎老师提出瘦身节食。
And Australia gets a mention too. It's clear to see how much China really does love Australia and how much they value us, even if that value is actually calculated in the RMB per tonne for lithium, iron ore and other raw materials. As an Australian visiting China, ultimately it's not the great ideological divide that creates that sense of otherness, but more the small details, the bureaucracy, the formality. I was there for work and every day consisted of formal meetings and presentations. I'd be sitting opposite a university president listening to a prepared written welcome speech, and I was just going to wing it in the hope that while my colleague was translating, I'd have enough time to come up with another gracious way to thank our hosts. I'd give a masterclass to a packed room and wouldn't get a single question until I was packing up to go to the next location and would be flooded by Gen Z Chinese students all wanting to have their selfies taken with me. The weirdness was perhaps most evident in Wuhan. I attended one banquet dinner that pretty much summed up the experience. Long didactic speeches to an empty room while I waited for the toast so I could actually drink that thimbleful of wine sitting in front of me. Wuhan is a place that's literally lost in translation, if that hotel sign is anything to go by. And as for that display in the lobby, I mean, is it some kind of postmodern art installation? Yes, we can't talk about the weirdness and wonder of China without bringing up that particular location. Wuhan is a city that for some unknown reason has entered the global public consciousness, and I'm not referring to its optic, electronic and car manufacturing technologies. Now, every landscape photographer loves a bit of mist. It can create separation between the subject and background, highlighting the natural beauty of the environment. Wuhan is actually built on the confluence of lakes and rivers, creating three distinct towns focusing on things like education, culture and technology. But of course, I didn't see much of that. And I wasn't there for the big landscapes, let's be honest. I wanted to visit Ground Zero. No, not the location of the Wuchang uprising, something more recent. Since I was in Wuhan, I couldn't pass up the opportunity for a ghoulish foray to the local wet market, even if it has now long since been closed down. It was actually a worthwhile experience. The scale and the busyness of the area, its proximity to housing, transport, public buildings, you can see just how things spread. And it was pretty sobering imagining being locked down in one of those apartments. I couldn't get to see my markets though. Surely they must have just moved them elsewhere. Well, yes they did.
Hello.
So it was just a brief trip to the not-so-local wet market where I was spotted suspiciously loitering around tanks of cephalopods with my GoPro. Far more organised and less busy than I imagined the original would have been. Surprisingly enough, my natural ability to just blend in didn't seem to wash over the locals. My colleague did say I was there to buy groceries, but I'm not sure they believed him. Anyway, I managed to get out before we created a diplomatic incident. And speaking of which, before I get cancelled by the Eye of Mordor or the YouTube algorithm, let's move on to less controversial topics, like sex. Actually, all of this talk of wet markets has reminded me that there's one thing even more important than sex, and that's food. Don't worry, I'll get onto the sex later. Just as in James Joyce's Ulysses, Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls, I was treated to an array of dishes that pretty much ran the index of a veterinarian anatomy textbook, from esophagus to zygote. feet, brain, intestine. I ate all of them with relish. Relish here being attitude rather than the condiment. I think I drank enough green tea that I'd actually bleed it if you cut me now. If you've ever been to China, you'll have noticed that hot water is considered a drink there rather than just something you do the dishes in. Not a huge fan of reshui or drinking beer at lunch. I just asked for a Diet Coke and was a little bit nonplussed when it came out steaming. They also serve beer at room temperature in China too, so if you want something cold, stick Bing, the Mandarin word for ice, in front of it just so they know.
早上好，中国！现在我有冰淇淋，我很喜欢冰淇淋。
I was aware that I wasn't eating home cooking while I was there, but even the most basic street food in China is actually pretty tasty. I've eaten plenty of anonymous cooked birds bought from street vendors before and been none the worse for it. I have been told it's quail, and look, I'm going out on a limb here to say that I didn't actually see many quail running around in the streets of Guangzhou. I did see a few pigeons though, so delicious anyway. We've broached every other controversial topic, so let's end on this one.
It's not unusual to be loved by anyone.
Tom Jones was right, and it's not unusual to see people openly displaying affection with physical PDAs abounding even within the sexes, which probably says something about our own society, that we conflate friendship and intimacy with sex and treat it as something to be hidden. That's not to say that this is some kind of sexual nirvana. Far from it, I suspect. Now, I do have to point out that I am something of an expert on the subject of Chinese relationships, having seen multiple episodes of the Chinese dating show If You Are the One, a show in which a prospective boyfriend would pour out his heart to a panel of beautiful females, imploring them that he just wants a good woman to settle down with, and watch the lights on their podiums turn off one by one as a manifest symbol of their rejection. Well, they've obviously shaken the formula up a bit since then. Yes, modern Chinese women still want a rich man to pamper them with affection and Louis Vuitton bags, but this time I noticed that the TV show has now brought in the real decision makers, the parents. And let's be real here, that's where the power lies. They've paid for their kids' education, bought them those trinkets, and given the current cost of real estate, are probably co-investors in the conjugal home. All of that comes with a cost. If you think about the psychosocial dynamics of the whole one-child policy, you have either a useless daughter who will never be able to take over the family business, or a precious only boy for whom nobody will ever be good enough. Their role, therefore, is to find the right match for their precious offspring. Either a nice but unattractive boy for their useless daughter to lift them out of poverty, or a beautiful but accommodating female slave to wipe the drool from their entitled inbred son while he plays Honor of Kings, bribed with the promise of Prada sunglasses and yes, those Louis Vuitton bags. If you want to see this in action, you just need to go to People's Park in Shanghai on a weekend afternoon, a different kind of wet market. While the rest of the world seems to have gone online, this is the super spreader event of the week, where hundreds of immunocompromised elderly Chinese people try to foist their sprogs onto the Shanghai populace. Of course, I had to be there, and I had to shoot it in black and white because, let's face it, that gives it the gravitas that you just don't get with colour photos of people hanging around a park on an afternoon. So there you have it, the weirdness and wonder of China from the perspective of one person who's been there for 2 weeks. We've rolled around together on the tapestry of travel, technology, urbanization, sex, politics, and of course food, not necessarily learning much, but hopefully having a bit of a good time along the way. So, what about China as a photographic destination? Well, firstly, it's fair to say that there is no China as such, at least not a single China. It's such a rich and diverse society that you can only ever really capture slivers of fragments of the complexity of the place. I've been there several times, but as much as I joke about my expertise, everything I've said today could be taken or should be taken with a grain of salt, simply because my experience has always been framed by the fact that as much as I've tried to break the mold, my experience is a limited and very curated one. I mean, I've never even been to Beijing. Nearly all of the photos you're seeing here today were taken with my Olympus Pen F, with a couple of quick snaps from my phone thrown in for good measure. Was it up to the task? Definitely. Sorta, kinda. Look, this camera is starting to show its age. The Leica 12 to 60mm lens, which is a 24 to 120mm equivalent, is an amazing lens and took the vast majority of the shots you've seen today. When I have the time to visit a known place, it's fun to slap on a tiny prime lens and train it on a specific point of interest. But when you're facing the unknown, there's a lot of comfort in having a sharp, bright zoom lens that will allow you to get a range of pictures in a range of situations. You can see in the night photos that the Micro Four Thirds sensor does struggle a little bit, but what would be the alternatives? Even the smallest full frame or APS-C camera starts to get big once you add glass to it. And look, it really did a good job, even if the contrast detect autofocus didn't always lock on. Some of my favourite shots aren't the sharpest, cleanest or most technically perfect. I kinda like the abstraction captured at slow shutter speeds as I zoom past towns on the train. In People's Park, lots of the photos were taken on this little ultra-wide that doesn't even autofocus. I stopped down the aperture and just pointed it in the right general direction of anything interesting and hoped that I didn't truncate too many people's heads or end up with pictures of nose hair as I shoved myself in front of the action. If I was to sum up my experience, it would be one of fundamental dichotomies. East meets West, old meets new. For me, Shanghai is probably the greatest example of this. Xi'An Temple is a Buddhist temple, an oasis nestled among city skyscrapers. You could be forgiven for thinking this dated back hundreds of years. And true, the original temple was constructed in 247 AD. But China's history is such that it was razed to the ground during the Cultural Revolution and turned into a plastics factory, before being rebuilt again in the 1980s. If there is an underpinning tension to this dichotomy, nobody who was there on the day seemed to notice. So the cycle of invention and reinvention goes on.
Collator is ready. Please hold the handrail.
So the cycle of invention and reinvention goes on. Buildings erase each other, technology encroaches, and all the time the one constant in the equation is the most chaotic of all: us. Humanity still seems to find a way to assert itself, and even there is a dichotomy between our need for personal fulfillment and our need to be connected to the collective currents that nurture and sustain us. Across the way from the temple, old people gathered in traditional costumes and danced to the music of their ethnic regions. And if there's a conclusion to this story, then maybe that's it. As trite as it sounds to say people are people, there's still a lot more that we have in common than we are different. No matter where we're from, we build monuments to our achievements to give them meaning and to make them last beyond our own ephemeral lifetimes. We create new and wondrous technologies that ostensibly free us from grind and make our lives easier, while, strangely enough, our lives still go on as before, imperfect and fraught as ever. We navigate the joys and traumas of existence and somehow survive and somehow even thrive. As I was leaving, I was asked by a group of Buddhist monks to take their photo, which I duly did on their phones as well as on my own camera, sending it out to them later. Okay, I'll take that too. Yeah. 谢谢. All right, okay. I now have 8 Buddhist monks in my WeChat contacts list, so hopefully that'll be good karma to make up for all the ill-informed and reductive commentary in this video. Look, I'm not an expert on China. I'm not even an informed observer, just another random tourist walking the streets with my camera. Think of this as kind of a first impressions video. And on that note, I welcome your own thoughts. Have you been to China? Maybe you're even from there. What changes have you observed? What did I misrepresent? What did I miss out entirely? Give me your comments below about this amazing place, and maybe we can all learn a little bit more. China is definitely diverse and distinguished. I mean, seriously. While most of us were busy painting on walls and picking fleas off each other, the Chinese invented writing. For an outsider like me, it's a unique and disorienting place, but I can't help coming away with a sense that I've only scratched the surface. Perhaps the biggest realization and the most comforting thought is that despite the diversity, despite our ideological and cultural differences, there's always that one thing that unites us, and that's our common humanity. We work, we play, we laugh, we cry, eat, drink, fall in love, and these days post it all on social media. And while we may not all look the same or speak the same language, we're united by our common human connection and our clumsy awkwardness as we fumble and bumble, trying to make sense of life and just hoping not to stuff it up too much. As I left China, I felt its future was bright. Like all of us, it's got its challenges, and like all of us, it's beautiful in its own way. I guess the key for all of us too is to marvel and bask in the wonder that is humanity, explore and celebrate our differences, find those things that we have in common, and hopefully come together to help navigate some of those seemingly intractable global challenges we're all facing in a richer and more broadly informed way. Later.